Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, dear colleagues, dear friends. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all today. My name is Irina Pinchuk. I am psychiatrist, director of Institute of Psychiatry, Shevchenko National University of Kiev, country director, International Technology Transfer Center, Ukraine, and head of ISSUP Ukraine National Chapter. I am very pleased to announce today the third webinar in a new six-part webinar series dedicated to the emergency situation in Ukraine, war, psychological skills for surviving and coping with traumatic events. The webinar series is a joint initiative of ISSUP Ukraine National Chapter and ITTC-Ukraine. I would like to emphasize that this is just the beginning of the large series of the training and implementation assistance event to address various aspects of war trauma. We have already had two webinars where we talked about support of adult population in times of war and specifically focus on first aid for children. We have over 1,000 registration for each webinar. The two webinars were attended by 900 participants from 73 countries. This is a great honor for us as well as a huge responsibility. The third webinar today will focus how to help people who have become refugees or internally displaced. According to official data, as a result of the Russian war in Ukraine, more than 8 million Ukrainian residents have already become internally displaced and more than 4 million left Ukraine. The topic of providing assistance to internally displaced and people who have become refugees is up to date for Ukraine now. So it is my honor to introduce Dr. Patricia Watson. She is a psychologist working for the National Center for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. Prior to join the National Center for PTSD, Patricia was a Navy psychologist for 8 years, working with adults and children. She has co-edited books on disaster behavioral health intervention and numerous articles, guidance documents, and chapters on disaster mental health, combat and operational stress, early intervention, and resilience. Dr. Patricia Watson is indeed world-class expert in this area, and Ukraine is getting assistance from the best professional possible. Patricia Watson held our second webinar and talk about first aid for children. Let me once again thank you, our colleague, for supporting our specialists during this dark time. I also want to note that Dr. Patricia Watson sent material and links to useful material on this topic in English and Ukrainian. All these materials are available on the ISSUP website. I would like to inform the attendants of the webinar that you can send us your questions in the chat during the presentation. Please find the chat in the Go to the Webinar Control panel. You can also find information about the interpretation to Ukrainian in the chat. If time is not enough, question by email are welcome. Dr. Patricia Watson, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen now for you. And Again, it's really an honor to be here with all of you today, and I appreciate that you're taking time out of your schedule to learn different strategies to help people. As you remember last week, those of you that were attending last week got to hear about a model called psychological first aid. We spoke about it specifically in reference to children. And the week before that, my colleague Sonia Norman presented about another model called stress first aid. Both of these models are meant to be used early following some sort of disaster or conflict or adversity. And generally what we tend to do is provide information for people, for the broad range of people that might be helpful for them. And then for those who need a bit more support early on, we offer psychological first aid types of activities where you're helping people feel more safe and comfortable. You're getting them practical resources. You're getting them connected with social support, and you're helping foster their ability to cope. This intervention that we're going to be talking about today is meant to be used a little bit later for people who may be displaced or may have gone through something, but your sense is that it would be helpful for them to learn some skills for themselves that would empower them to be able to cope with what's going on. And generally, our feeling is that if you're able to provide information and psychological first aid, and then skills for psychological recovery, our hope is that fewer people will need more intensive mental health treatment later down the road. We'll hopefully have given enough support that will have reduced the amount of people who will need formal mental health treatment, because we know that often there isn't enough of a population of trained mental health practitioners to help everybody who needs the help. And we also know that it's very challenging for people to get themselves to formal mental health treatment. So this model that I'm going to be talking about today.
Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Watson. We can't see your PowerPoint at full screen at the moment.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Underneath the share button, could you make sure it says main screen just in the drop-down menu?
Okay, let's see if this will work.
Yes,
thank you for interrupting.
Thank you.
That worked? Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so skills for psychological recovery, or we call it SPR, is a series of skills that my colleagues and I, the same colleagues who came together to develop psychological first aid, decided that we needed something a little more intensive than psychological first aid, after people had received that. And we invited Richard Bryant from Australia to also join us to develop this model. This is a model that draws upon what we know from mental health treatment models that are effective, that we know have helped people across many different settings. And it's designed to be a model that teaches, as I said, simple skills to people. And it's also designed to be very flexible. You can use it in one contact with a person and teach them one skill. We hope that you'll have more opportunities to meet with a person to teach them all 5 skills, but it really should be used very flexibly and tailored to your capacity as well as the needs of the person in front of you. We think about it a bit like what's often called facilitated self-help, where you have a guide who helps a person to help themselves, and you're teaching people to manage their own challenges a bit better. Again, as I said before, we're hoping to empower people to feel like they can handle what's happening. And the way that it differs from psychological first aid is that psychological first aid is really meant to be used early on, the first days and hours, but we stretch psychological first aid out also when there's a very intensive sense of threat. So if the person is still in the middle of a lot of chaos and a feeling of threat and adversity, you can use psychological first aid for longer periods of time. And then skills for psychological recovery, again, is meant to be used a bit later when they're when the chaos has subsided a bit and you feel like they would benefit from learning some skills. We also know that psychological first aid is a bit of doing for a person, giving them resources, giving them information, giving them advice, and doing things for them because they're so much in the middle of chaos. Whereas skills for psychological recovery is meant to be doing with a person, where you're sitting alongside them and saying, look, how can you and I together help you figure out some things you can do to get through this? And typically, psychological first aid might occur just in one contact with the person, where you're guiding them to where they need to go next. Whereas our hope is that with skills for psychological recovery, you could meet with them more than once, because whenever you're teaching somebody something, we know it works better when they can check in with you, you can find out how they're doing, you can practice things together, that type of thing. And the way that skills for psychological recovery differs from more formal mental health treatment is that the focus of mental health treatment is usually on diagnosing a person and then finding the right treatment for that diagnosis. Whereas skills for psychological recovery is more of a simple focus on what does this person need right now? How can I help them take the next steps and develop their own natural resilience with some coping skills? So there's not a need to formally diagnose or do a formal assessment. What you're trying to do is just get a sense of what do they need in their life? What are their top goals and priorities? And how can I help move them in that direction? Usually, mental health treatment occurs in an office, whereas skills for psychological recovery can occur anywhere. Wherever you can have a quiet place to sit down with somebody, you can, help them with this model. Whereas mental health treatment might help a person focus on processing emotions, talking about the things that happened to them in the past. The goals of skills for psychological recovery are much more focused on the present moment and things you can do in this moment and looking forward into the future to get a sense of change, to get a sense of empowerment, as I said. We also know that formal mental health treatment is usually conducted with mental health professionals who have been trained to provide that treatment. With skills for psychological recovery, we have simplified it to a degree that it is meant to be used by either mental health professionals or people who are trained like this in the community to be paraprofessionals or, disaster responders, that type of thing. Mental health treatment usually lasts longer, and skills for psychological recovery is usually, as I said, it could be just one meeting with a person, but hopefully more than one. And with mental health treatment, usually the professional has been trained to use a wider array of interventions. And with skills for psychological recovery, we picked more simple, teaching-oriented types of interventions that don't require the level of skill that mental health treatment might require. So the components of skills for psychological recovery that we have chosen for people are based on first gathering information so that you have a better sense of whatever stress reactions that person might have, that you're mainly focusing on what they think their top needs are, what their priorities are, and that you're also providing support while you gather that information. You're also giving them a sense of, okay, I think if you and I work together, we might be able to meet some of your needs, that we could, together help you get through the next steps. And then once you've gathered that information and supported them, you choose from 5 different skill sets that we included in this model. The first is helping them be better able to be problem solving, to solve problems, to break them down into small chunks and come up with some solutions. Helping them to add in activities into their life that give them either a sense of meaning or fulfillment or a sense of positive emotion, because we know that what happens when people are going through very adverse circumstances is that they tend to reduce the things in their life that may have made them smile or may have made them have a sense of meaning or may have given them a sense of hope. They start to reduce those things, and then they have nothing that feeds them in a positive way, that we call it feeding their soul or feeding their sense of, okay, I have this moment of happiness or this moment of meaning in my life. So we're trying to build those back into their schedule. We also have some simple strategies for helping people manage their stress reactions. We have a module on helping them to think a bit differently so that if they're stuck or immobilized by the way that they're talking to themselves, we can shift them out of that to have thoughts that might be a little bit more helpful for them. And lastly, we have a module on helping them think through what their social network is and how they might build that social network to get social support. We picked these 5 modules because they've been included in mental health treatments for depression, for anxiety, for post-traumatic stress disorder, and we know that they're helpful for people who have many different types of stress reactions. We also know that they're simple enough that it would be, a matter of just spending, 30 to 60 minutes with the person to walk them through one of these skill sets, and that it might be something that could move them, as I said, in the direction of feeling like they have the ability to get through this. We hope that we know that a big function of any kind of meeting that you have with people right now, and I mentioned this last week, is just that you are there as a caring person to help them. That the fact that you are there with them, that you are a helper, that you are a person who has the capacity to care and has a good heart, is we know that in and of itself is healing for people. But we also know that beyond that kind of empathy and support, that we think that from looking at the research, that if you're also able to impart a sense that that person can do things for themselves, you're more likely to empower them, to help them get activated and feel like they're not as stuck in the problems that they're facing, that the person is more likely to attribute their feeling better to themselves and their own actions, so it makes them feel better about themselves rather than feeling like you did it for them, that they're more likely to be able to use these coping skills in the future in other situations, and they're more likely to feel like you will also be more likely to feel like they're making some progress. And hopefully, because of that, it will reduce your stress levels as well. When we have rolled this model out after different disasters, for instance, many of the providers said that they felt better about the work they were doing because they felt like they were actually teaching something that that person could use. And they saw the progress that person was making, and it made them feel better about the work they were doing. So our goals for Skills for Psychological Recovery are hopefully, we know that under many different circumstances of adversity, the majority of people are going to find their way through it. It's one of the amazing things about human beings is that people tend to find a way through life and tend to find ways to be resilient. I spoke last week about certain elements that are particularly helpful. If people can move towards feeling more safe, if they can move towards feeling more calm, if they have social support, if they feel like they're able to get through this, they either have the resources or the skills, and if they have a sense of hope, we know those elements seem to be related to better recovery. And with Skills for Psychological Recovery, we tried to fold in those elements to hopefully speed up people's recovery. Even though we know that people tend to find their way, we'd like to get them there more quickly. We would like to enhance their ability to get their needs met and address their concerns. We also want to support their healthy functioning and bolster it, give it extra support. We also want to prevent behaviors that might make problems worse. We know that it's very common for people when they're faced with adversity to sometimes choose coping strategies that, even though they seem to be helpful in the short run, they actually might create more problems in the long run. Sometimes people choose to drink more alcohol, for instance, And while it can help them calm down in the short run, we also know that it interferes with sleep. It can interfere with the deeper levels of sleep. So in the long run, it actually isn't helpful in that way. It also can interfere with their relationships. We know that people sometimes get angry as a way to cope, which can empower them. It can make them have more energy and like, I'm going to tackle this. But in the long run, it can also get in the way of relationships, that type of thing. So what we're trying to do is give people a direction with coping behaviors that are more likely to be positive, so that in the long run, they're not creating problems with some of their other choices. As I mentioned last week, as I mentioned in every training that I give, a big factor in skills for psychological recovery is you, okay? Who you are as a person and the relationship that you build with the person in front of you, okay? So always know that the fact that you're there with that person in and of itself is a gift, okay? And so if you forget some of what I've told you, or if you forget some of the details, just know that the fact that you're there with that person is a big, important piece of helping them to feel better, okay? And with skills for psychological recovery, we hope that your style, the way that you are with them, can be very focused on their needs, very focused on what they can do in the present moment to get through whatever they're going through, and very practical in that way. That you're always maintaining this warmth and care and empathy for the person, that you're communicating a certain confidence that I know you can do this, you know, let's work on this together, but I know that you can take this and work with it and use some of these skills to address some of your needs. And that your partnership is very accepting, very warm, very compassionate, so that the person knows that you're not judging them in any way, and it helps them to be more comfortable learning something new, that it helps them want to be more likely to meet with you more than once, that it helps them be able to tolerate not only the stress in their life, but any change that they're going through, that your relationship and the foundation that you develop with them will help them persist in practicing some of these new skills and reminds them of their resources and their own strength, and that it helps them to become less likely to get stuck in whatever it is they're doing, and that they can also feel more comfortable being honest with you to say, you know what, this didn't help me, or actually, you know, I need something else. Because if they know that you care and that you're not going to judge them, they're more likely to say, look, I tried it and it didn't work. And then the two of you together can maybe try different things or adjust what it is that you've taught them so that it works better for them. So we also know that skills for psychological recovery is less likely to be helpful if a person, as I said, is in the middle of such chaos that they can't even take in learning something new, okay? And if that's the case, always fall back on psychological first aid or just supportive listening, giving them resources, just letting them talk, guiding them to get, you know, to the places where they need to go without necessarily teaching them new skills. If they're just too overwhelmed, maybe not motivated to try out new things, or they feel just things are too chaotic, maybe it's better to wait a bit or to try, you know, to focus more on psychological first aid rather than skills for psychological recovery. Also, if they're really severely in a mode of wanting to harm themselves or harm others, or they have a severe alcohol or substance use problem, it may be that skills for psychological recovery is not going to be enough, and you may need to refer them to more intensive mental health treatment or get some support where you have more than yourself helping them. Also, if they have an unstable medical condition that requires immediate attention, that has to be a priority before you work on skills for psychological recovery. If they're seeing or hearing things that aren't there, if you're worried that they might have some dissociation or some they're having hallucinations or delusions, that is going to require some assistance from a psychiatrist or some other mental health professional. And if they have a severe cognitive disability where they're not able to take in what you're teaching them for whatever reason. They're not able to remember it, or they're not able to grasp what you're trying to teach them. Consider something else for them, either psychological first aid or support in other ways besides skills for psychological recovery. We also know it's important for you to give a realistic picture of what skills for psychological recovery can accomplish. Try to encourage the person to try out the skills and see how and when they work best. They do need the person to practice them in order for them to show some changes. And you can talk to them about, look, try it out. It's like learning a new sport. It's like learning how to cook. It's like learning anything. You've got to try it out in different ways before you'll see some progress. And with each of the skills, this training is much too short for you to get everything that you need to know. So I would encourage you to go to the website and look at the manual, because there's very specific information in the manual. We also have an online training it takes longer. And the link to that is in one of the later slides. But give yourself also some practice in learning these skills, because how you talk with people about them is important as well. Teaching them, why is it important for you to learn problem solving? Why do I think it is important for you to build in some, fulfilling activities in your schedule? They're going to need to hear that, because whenever you're asking people to try something new, they need to have a reason why they need to try it. So we have rationales for each of the skills that you can present to that person. If you're meeting with a person once, generally you're going to make contact with them, introduce yourself, talk with them. It may be that you already know them if they're in a shelter and you've met with them before, but gather enough information to decide what you think might be helpful for them. Usually when people only have one time with a person, they tend to choose problem solving, because problem solving is a very broad skill set that can apply to many different things. And it's a simple skill, and it's an easy one to introduce first, because you can work together on it and show some progress immediately. And then you hopefully will end with giving a person a sense of what to do next, the next steps for them. Here's a plan for you. We can also print out some handouts that we have in the manual to give them as a reminder if you have that ability, but definitely give them a sense of that it doesn't stop here. Now it's important to try out some of what we've done together. Try it out in your life, see how it works. And then maybe if they need a referral to somebody else, you can give them a referral. Our hope, though, is that you have more than one contact with people, and the first steps are always the same. You make contact, you gather information, and you decide what's most needed. If you have the ability to meet with them more than once, usually the way you decide what's most needed usually depends upon what their stress reactions are. So you ask them, what are you experiencing right now? If they're saying to you, I'm very depressed, then you can decide maybe more than one skill set might be helpful for them. So if they're depressed, you might decide to build in some positive activities, or you might focus on social support, or you might take a look at how they're thinking and what they're saying to themselves. And if you have the opportunity to meet with them more than once, you can focus on one skill set each time you meet with them. So that's why we feel like that skills for psychological recovery tends to work better when you have the ability to meet with people more than once. You can either master one skill across different times with that person, or you can pick more than one skill to work on. So I would say, just as a general summary of what I've covered, remember that skills for psychological recovery is more directive. It's more about you teaching some skills, so you have to be comfortable yourself with being in that role of a teacher or a coach, and so or a trainer for a person. Your relationship is very important with that person, because they have to know that you're not just trying to get them to change. You have a reason for wanting to teach them certain skills, and if it's based on your empathy for them, if it's based on your focus on what their priorities are, and you're saying to them, you know what, given what you've told me, I think it might be helpful to do this. that's going to have a very different effect than somebody coming in and saying, you need to learn this. So you have to be very kind, very compassionate with them, and very much focused on what they say their needs are. And then they're going to be more likely to say, okay, I'll try it. Make sure that you're always very flexible. And if that person's capacity to take information in is reduced because of what they're going through, you be very flexible and use really small steps. You give them very small things to try out, because we don't want to overwhelm them or bombard them with too much information. That is probably going to make them feel worse. So make sure that you're always considering the timing and the context. If you feel like, you know what, their life is just so chaotic, I'm just going to do my best to try to support them this time. And then maybe next time we can revisit practicing some of these skills. So it's a bit like a dance. You find out how they're doing, depending upon how they're doing. Sometimes you're giving more support. Sometimes you're focusing more on the skills and training them. And both are, needed. Both are needed. And then in the manual, we also have scattered throughout the manual alerts and information about making sure that you're sensitive to culture, that you're sensitive to the person's gender, and that you're also taking into account developmental factors. Because very much like psychological first aid, the Skills for Psychological Recovery model was designed both for children and adults. So our handouts are slightly different for children, and we have, guides about how to do this with children versus how to do this with an adult written into the manual. So as I said before, I would also remember that if you're teaching somebody a new skill, it's very important to give them the reason for the new skill. You might say to them, with problem solving, oftentimes when people are in the middle of something that feels overwhelming to them, it can help to talk with somebody like me, break things down into smaller problems, and then brainstorm a little bit how to solve some of those smaller components of what feels like a bigger problem, and do things a step at a time. So if you give them that kind of rationale and tell them, when people do it this way, sometimes it helps them to feel more like they can tackle something. They feel less overwhelmed. They're more likely to say, okay, I'll try that. And as I said, typically the more times you can meet with a person, the better the results are going to be. We typically tell people to follow the steps of each skill, because the steps are there to be a guide for you so that you don't forget, how to walk a person through this skill set. If you have the opportunity to use the worksheets or the handouts, those can be helpful for you too, because the steps are laid out in each of the worksheets, so they remind you what to do next with a person. Also remember that Skills for Psychological Recovery isn't for all issues. It's really meant to be used for very particular types of problems a person might be facing or stress reactions they're having. And as I said, if they need more, make sure you're always thinking in terms of referral for more resources, and referring people out for other situations and other long-standing problems they have. So I want to just quickly go through each of the core actions. Again, this is a short training, so I won't be able to do justice to the full program. So I highly encourage you to read the manual or to take a look at the online training. Our rationale for gathering information is that when people are in the middle of something or they've gone through something, they can often feel very distressed, and information gathering can help you focus in on ways to help them. Okay, it can help them also make more sense and organize their thoughts about what they've been through as well. And hopefully it can clarify for them some of what might be helpful for them and give them a sense of strength and hope to move forward with what they need to move forward with. As I said, important to gather information in a very supportive way, be very practical with the person, be focused on their unique needs, and ask only enough questions to gather, what is most concerning for you right now? What are your top priorities? Don't spend a whole lot of time gathering information, because you need to use your time with them to actually teach them the skills. So we really want you to focus in on what they consider to be most important. throughout gathering information, I know I've said this many, many times, but very important to maintain this kind of empathy and support and warmth. And use, supportive statements, use supportive comments so that the person knows that they can be honest with you, that they can report if this skill isn't working for them, that they can tolerate trying things out in a different way, and they can remember their strengths. So when you're gathering information, be efficient, be warm, be focused, and pick, one thing to focus on with that person. Say, it sounds to me like your main concern right now is that you're really having a hard time with your stress reactions, that you're having a hard time because you're so anxious. It makes it hard for you to do anything else. Is that correct? Make sure you check in with them. And if they say yes, then you can say, you know what, I think it might be helpful for you and I to work together to manage and to help you with that anxiety a little bit before we do anything else. And then just focus in on that one thing. And you want to really try to gather information to understand what's most concerning, to determine what their needs are, to decide what skill set might be most helpful, or if they need a referral, and to decide which skills to prioritize with them. If you can, if it makes sense to gather information about where they come from or what their other sources of support are or other resources they have, you can also fold that into gathering information so that you can, figure out the best next steps for them. And then as you move into some of the problem-solving skills or other skills of SPR, your goal is to help a person zero in on things and to tackle a problem or to tackle some other issue that they're having. So as I said, problem-solving skills, when we conducted research with this model, this is a skill set that most practitioners said they used fairly frequently, and they felt comfortable with this skill set. What we're trying to do as a rationale for problem solving is to help people focus on a problem directly, generate ideas that might be helpful to, solve the problem, have a more thoughtful selection of next steps, and make a plan to follow through with some sort of action. And you can use this skill set in many different types of situations. The rationale for them, if you're, trying to explain to them why you've picked this skill, is that we know that when people are under a lot of stress, it can make it hard for them to make decisions. It can make it hard for them to feel like they can think clearly. And people tend to be less creative and less able to solve problems when they're under a lot of stress. So we know that the presence of continuing problems can maintain stress reactions. And then if it's hard to solve problems, the stress reactions become stronger. So problem solving can help them really focus in on a kind of a more steady, structured way of looking at problems and solving them. The steps of all of our skill sets are fairly brief. We usually have 1 to 5 steps. 5 is the most. Usually it's 3 to 4 steps for each of our skill sets. And for problem-solving skills, after explaining why you think it would be helpful to focus in on this, the steps are to define the problem, to set a goal, a very realistic goal, and then to brainstorm together possible solutions. And those solutions can be very unrealistic. You want that person to be creative when they're brainstorming. You can say to them, right now, all we're going to do is just try to come up with as many solutions as we can. They don't even have to be realistic. We're just trying to play with ideas, okay? And then after we come up with these ideas, we can then focus in on the ones that are the most realistic. But you really want to have them open up their creativity a little bit to brainstorm, and then together, the two of you can choose the best next steps for them, and then make a little plan for them to move in that direction. Hopefully, what will happen is that you break the problem down into more clear steps for them before you generate potential solutions. We want to break it down into something smaller not have an overwhelming problem, but say, okay, how about if we focus in on this aspect of the problem, and then we'll generate some solutions and make solutions that are going to be relatively easy for you to try, and then come back and meet again, hopefully to check on their progress. Now, I realize that I don't have a lot of time to cover all of our skill sets, so I'm going to go relatively quickly through the skills. With promoting positive activities, this isn't necessarily for everyone. We know that when people are really depressed, they sometimes can get very stuck. They feel like they have no energy, they have no motivation to do anything. So this skill set is really aimed towards trying to improve mood or health or well-being, and to also help people feel like at least they can be in control of doing one simple thing that might give them a moment of peace or a moment of fulfillment or a moment of rest. And we hope that it builds their immune system, their emotional immune system, and their social immune system, and their physical immune system as well by doing this. It's very important, though, to tell people that this isn't designed to immediately make them feel better. It's not your goal to all of a sudden remove their depression. Absolutely not. We're not trying to make light of what they've gone through. What we're trying to do, many of you may have heard of Viktor Frankl, who has written a book about logotherapy, was what he chose. He was in a concentration camp, and he realized that for him, his way of getting through it was to try to find very small things that might give him a moment of meaning or joy or peace, and like looking at the sunset or being in nature, and he built his recovery on small moments where he could either be in prayer or be in gratitude or be in awe about the beauty of a sunset. And he realized that this wasn't going to be the solution to all his problems, but it was an important component, that he needed these moments in order to build his strength. And that is what positive activities is about. We have worksheets that give people ideas. We have potential, activities that they could choose from, or you and they can work together to choose their activities. This quote is one that I like. If you hear a voice within you that says you cannot paint, then by all means paint, and that voice will be silenced. Our goal with positive activities is that when a person says, I can't even stand up, I can't do this, or I can't, in any way have any sense of peace, then then the goal is to try to get them to at least try to do some little thing that might make them realize, okay, I can do something that will help me feel some sort of fulfillment, some sort of peace, some sort of joy. And it might be helping others. It might be doing something meaningful. It might be prayer. It might be being in nature. It really is up to them to decide what it is for them. We know that people often stop doing rewarding things because they're too busy to cope with other problems. They just don't feel like it anymore, or they feel sad or apathetic. So what we're trying to do, as I said, is build in a sense that a person can do even small things that make them feel that life has moments of normality, or that they feel, even for a moment, less sad or less hopeless or less fearful. And it reminds them that even if they're overwhelmed or exhausted, they can do small things that might step by step improve their health or well-being. Okay. So problems with focusing on changing feelings is that if a person just tries to change their feelings directly, well, I'm not going to be sad. We know that doesn't work. You typically tend to either have to change a behavior or change a thought in order to change feelings. So this skill set is focused on changing a behavior that will then hopefully in the long run change feelings. That's our goal with this skill set. We're aiming to change behaviors that will then hopefully change feelings. One of the alerts, you'll find the provider alerts throughout the manual for skills for psychological recovery. One of the alerts for this skill set are that this is slow going. Our goal isn't to tell a person they're going to feel better if they do these things, that they're going to immediately feel better. our goal is to say to them, we need to build in things that are positive for you, almost like taking vitamins. You know, the vitamins aren't going to cure you, but they will strengthen you in order to be able to face things. And our goal with this is the same, slowly, step by step, trying to build their strength or build their capacity to do more or to face what they have to face. And so be careful as the way that you talk with a person about this, that you're not trying to either deny their suffering or make them feel like they're immediately going to feel better. It can take time. And we're just trying to make small steps towards feeling better. The steps for this skill set are very simple. You try to identify with them what they think might be something they could build into their schedule. You pick one or two, and then you schedule it. You say, when would be the most likely time that you could do this? And because we know that when you have a person actually think about when they can do something, they're more likely to do it. So very simple steps for this activity, for this skill set. And I want to say the key points for this are to use it for people who are depressed or exhausted or need some sense of emotional nourishment or something that will feed them and make them feel even a little bit better. Make sure that you address not just activities that make them happy, but activities that might be rewarding or meaningful, like prayer or helping others. And any concern that this is trivial or not realistic in this environment needs to be talked about. If they say, this isn't going to help me, you need to be able to explain to them, it might not help you right away, but we want to just try to build it in just a little bit. Over time, it can maybe make a difference. And it also needs to be reminded, they need to be reminded that they have to keep practicing these things. It's not going to be something they do once and that'll fix things. It's something that they have to start to build into their schedule. So I'm realizing that we are have little time to cover the rest of the skills. So I'm just going to give a brief kind of overview of each of the skill sets. With managing reactions, what we tried to do was to build in a few different skill sets into this module. And the skill sets that we built in were breathing to help a person calm themselves down immediately, putting their feelings into words if they need to sort through what's happened to them or sort through their concerns. So we have people write in a journal and write about what they're feeling or what they're thinking. The third one is helping people to understand that they might be faced with things that remind them of what they've been through. And it's better to be prepared for those reminders and to think through what they can do to manage their stress reactions when they're faced with a reminder, to think that through ahead of time so they have a sense of control when a reminder happens. They can say to themselves, oh yeah, we talked about this. I know that some things are going to make me feel worse. And when this happens, I'm going to take a moment to breathe. I'm going to talk to a friend. I'm going to listen to some music. I'm going to do something that helps me to feel better because I know that this reminder is going to make me feel worse. So those are our three skill sets within this module, teaching people how to breathe differently, to take a moment to calm themselves, putting words into their difficult feelings or experiences by writing about them. Some people can also make artwork instead of writing about it, but trying to express feelings in a different way so that it gets it out of their head and onto paper, onto some sort of creative activity. And lastly, to think through what might be a reminder for them or what might be reminders for them and prepare for those reminders ahead of time. So I'm going to skip through this one. Those are the three kind of skill sets. We also, I'm going to send to you a manual called HATS, Healing After Trauma Skills. This is a manual that some of my colleagues at the National Child Traumatic Stress Network developed, and it's specifically for children. And there are some really nice little activities that you can use, I think, with children or adults to help them manage their feelings, feeling strips where they can write them down, a treasure box where they can go on a treasure hunt, or a dream catcher where they can talk about their dreams or their nightmares. making a stop sign that helps them to stop when they're having too many racing thoughts, making an activities wheel so they can think through different activities that might make them feel better. So I'll send that manual as well so you can have some ideas about how to work with children around some of these skills. Here's some others: making a collage, making a goals jar, that type of thing. And when we have people think about reminders, we have in our manual, as I said, worksheets, we have handouts with some ideas for them about different ways to deal with reminders. So those are all available in the manual as well. The key points about managing reactions are, we have lots of handouts. Please make use of them because they cover a lot of different potential stress reactions that people could have in situations like this. Remember to practice with the person the skill set when you're with them. Practice the breathing, practice the writing or the artwork, practice thinking through how to manage reactions. And if they feel like there might be something that'll be hard for them, talk it through with them and give them, maybe the two of you can adjust the skill sets to make it easier for them. The last two skill sets are promoting helpful thinking and helping people think through their social network. With helpful thinking, our goal is not to get them to think in a positive way. That's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is, if you have a person in front of you who tells you, I just am stuck, I can't do that because I keep telling myself that there's no way I'm going to be able to get through this, or I keep telling myself I should have done something differently, or I keep telling myself, you know, the world is so scary or it's so unsafe. And it makes me frozen. I can't do anything. So our goal is to really have empathy for the way they're talking to themselves, to look at what their goals are for themselves and to say, you know what, I think maybe it might be helpful if you think a little bit differently about this in order to take the next few steps that you need to take. And again, don't minimize their thoughts. Don't try to say to them, oh, you can't think that way. Whatever they're thinking is usually understandable given the context. What we're trying to do is either shift the thought slightly or add something to the thought that will mobilize them or energize them. And we're not about debating whether their thoughts are justified. We're really just trying to test out some slight variations on their thoughts to see if those variations on their thoughts might get them unstuck or move them in a positive direction. And as I said, it's not the same as thinking in a positive way. It's really more about getting them to move better in a direction they need to move in, okay? So the steps are to identify what they're saying to themselves, to maybe think through a different way of talking to themselves, to practice that and to try it out for themselves. And we have a chart, we have handouts that will help you work them through different thoughts. We have a whole handout that gives potential thoughts they might be thinking if they're having a hard time even identifying thoughts. Our handout is focused on feelings, and when you're feeling fearful, here are some common thoughts that we know that people have. Are any of these thoughts what you're saying to yourself? And then the handout also has some alternative thoughts so they don't have to come up with their own alternative thoughts if they're just too tired. So it can help you work through it with them. And our goal is to look at a way that they can shift even a small part of their thoughts. So I'll give you an example. One of the most common thoughts we have with people when they're going through difficult times is, there's no way I'm going to be able to do what I need to do. It's too overwhelming. And what we try to do is to add something on to the end of that thought, not to change the thought completely, but to add something on so it becomes, what's in front of me feels overwhelming. But now that I've met with this counselor, or now that I've had this conversation with this person, I know that maybe if I break it down into small steps, I might be able to at least do a little bit. Or even if it feels overwhelming, I know that I have help now. I can talk to this person or I can talk to that person, and I know that I might be able to do some of the things I need to do. So you're trying to just slightly shift or add something onto their thought, and emphasize to them that this is not going to come naturally. They have to practice it. Always, always, always be focusing on what their goals are and their priorities are for themselves, because you have to use those goals and priorities in order to be able to shake them out of this kind of rut that they've gotten into. People get into mind loops, they get into thought loops. And in order to be able to even get them to think differently, you have to tie whatever you're doing with their priorities and their goals so that they're willing to try to think slightly differently so they can move towards their own goals. The last skill set is rebuilding healthy social connections. We know that when people are going through difficult times, they can get isolated because they've had to move, they've had loss of family and friends, they can feel sad and not feel like connecting with other people. But we know that social support is so protective for people that that's why we have this skill set. And the rationale is that finding social support can help a person in multiple different ways. We know that it's helpful for people for lots of different reasons. So what we do is we try to use a map for people. We create a map, or we use the worksheet that has a predetermined map on it. And you work a person through trying to figure out who they might be able to talk with. It could be somebody that they weren't even aware of. It could be a family member by phone, or it could be, somebody that they've just met at church, or it could be a person in the shelter. But you try to talk with them about who they might be able to reach out to. And it's not just about getting help, it's also about giving help. It might make the first person feel better to give help to others. So you try to create this visual map for them to think through, what are your needs? How can social support help those needs? Maybe they need advice. Maybe there's a person who they could reach out to who's very wise, who could guide them or give them advice. Maybe they just need practical items, and the social support they need is for you to link them to resources, and that's a type of social support. So you're working them through this kind of map to think through what could be helpful for them. Now, we do have a provider alert in this section because this type of discussion about social support might be a reminder for them that they lost somebody, that a family member or a friend died. And so be very careful when you open up a conversation about social support, that it might remind them of losses that they've had. And be very empathic and compassionate about those losses, and very gently talk about why other social support might be helpful right now. It's not going to replace the person they lost, but it could be helpful in supporting them in different ways now. So the key points about building social network is to pay attention to loss, don't deny it, address the fact that they might have both positive and negative social support around them. They may want to move in the direction of positive support and move away from negative social influences around them, people who are complaining too much, people who are draining them, people who might be hurting them in one way or another, and move towards the positive social support. We also have handouts for people that aren't great socially, so we have some simple social skills handouts for how to ask for help or how to give help. That might help you as well. So I'm going to wrap this up and say that Skills for Psychological Recovery, as I said, is meant to empower people. The relationship you have is really important. Make sure to use small steps, form a partnership with that person, be sensitive to different factors that might, affect what you're doing with them, like culture and gender and age. And the more times you can meet with them, the better. Remember, it's not for all problems, but we hope that it can be a part of the package that can make people feel empowered, and that they have a partner in you who can help work them through some of these skills and practice them and try them out. Remember to always be flexible. If something's not working, try something else or figure out what's not working and adjust it. So I'm going to stop there. We have resources on our website, and there's an online course you can take. You just have to register, but it's free to register. So if you feel like you need to learn more about the steps, we have this course with videos to show you examples of how to talk with a person and that kind of thing. So thank you so much for your time. I know it was a lot of information. I appreciate your patience.
Thank you so much, Dr. Patricia Watson, for a very interesting presentation and very useful for our professionals today. Now we have a little time, but we have some questions. First of all, I would like to thank our participants for submitting this question. The question number one: what are some of the positive activities to promote CPR?
That's a great question. And in our worksheet, we have really simple activities that you can have a person do, like even just being in nature, or doing some simple art, or trying to support other people in their community if that's what would make them feel better. We're trying to keep it really simple, taking a walk. Because we know that there are going to be limitations on what people can do when they're in very chaotic, adverse circumstances. So we're not trying to give them activities that are either expensive or that are impossible for them to do. So I would really encourage you to take a look at the worksheets, because there are many ideas that are categorized in things you can do with your family, things you can do indoors, things you can do outdoors. And I also sent, and I'll send it again, an activity sheet that we made for psychological first aid for children of you know, inexpensive, simple things you can do with kids as well. So yeah, but keep it really simple.
Thank you very much. The next question, could we provide CPR for refugees and internally displaced people in the facility where they are temporarily located? Because in this situation, their life is not as usual.
Yes, I believe that you could provide these SPR to these people. What you would want to do, though, is try to find a place where you can speak with them without them being distracted too much. I mean, they do need to be able to focus a little bit on what you're saying, and you do need to be able to maybe you know, feel like you can speak for at least 20 minutes without being too much interrupted. So you'll have to figure out if that's possible. If it's not possible, then I have seen people be very skilled at taking SPR and doing it in a very flexible way. So they might just have a simple problem solving conversation with a person that only takes a few minutes, where the two, you know, they say, okay, it sounds like you're faced with this problem. Maybe you and I can try to think this through together. Can we break it down into smaller steps? Can we write down some simple things you can do today to move towards a solution to this problem? And that takes 5 to 10 minutes. So it really depends a bit on your personality. If you're a person who's comfortable being flexible and being in the moment with a person, I think you could take these skills and apply them no matter where you are. If you're a person who has a harder time and needs to feel like you're very, you know, structured, it might be more challenging for you to do that in a shelter, in which case I would think more about doing psychological first aid types of things versus SPR.
Thank you. The next question, for internally displaced person, there comes a period when they can become competitors to local community. What activities should be in the recovery program in this situation?
So can you, Irina, could you explain that a little bit more when they say competitors? I don't know what that.
Competitors.
What are they competing for?
For two local communities. Competitors for two local communities.
Right. So they so the displaced people are competitors, or the helpers are competitors? The displaced people are competitors. And are the local people feeling like they're competing for resources and so they're resentful, or is it something else? They're competing for jobs. What is the competition?
Jobs, for example, for place, for eat, and a lot of different things.
Right. Yes, I would say that one of the things that needs to happen is that this is why the social support is so important, because people can start to feel very isolated. People can start to feel that those around them don't want them there. And so it becomes very important for them to, again, figure out even maybe one person they can connect with in the local community who's supportive. Or if they feel that nobody's supportive, then figure out who in the shelter could be supportive. So they're not doing this all on their own, because they're going to have to, on a daily basis, problem solve that problem. That is a definite, adversity that they're having to face if they feel that the people around them are resentful or hostile towards them. So one of the strategies would be to get other support from people either in the shelter, or try to find even one or a few people in the community who are supportive, who you can then connect with and slowly make your way, in a way that doesn't feel threatening to the rest of the people in the community. But that's a huge question. It's one I cannot do justice to. I'm so sorry, but I would say that one of the first steps would be gathering support from somebody else, not to face it on your own.
Thank you. How to build coping skills with clients with drugs use problem?
Again, your questions are all excellent, and they're also really challenging. I would say that with a drug use problem, building skills is probably going to have to be done very carefully, because what you want to do is not give up on that person. Even a person who's struggling with drug use problems could benefit from learning some of these skills. We know from looking at some of the research on drug use, for instance, that people are more likely to be able to move out of drug use if they have other rewarding things in their life besides the drugs. So if there's a way that you can build either a social support network for that person, or you can build their ability to find other fulfilling things in their life, it will support them. I'm not going to say it's going to be easy, because that is an uphill battle. All of us know that you can work with a person for years on substance use issues and not be able to move them out of them. So what you might be able to do with skills is improve their quality of life, even slightly. Even if you can't shake them out of the substance use, you might be able to shift their quality of life, or to have them feel supported in one way or another. But it's one of the most challenging tasks that I've seen helpers be faced with. So I'm not going to make light of it. It is, if you can find little ways to support them, wonderful, but you may need to work with specialists, or you may need to work with their family more than with them, because their family might be suffering as a result of their drug use as well.
Thank you. Maybe the last question. What do I need to do to get continued education for this?
I would take a look at our online course. The link is on the last slide, because I believe that some people can get continuing education for that by taking that course. I don't know what the rules are outside of our country, but I do know that they tried to set it up to provide continuing education if you take that course. I would also suggest that if that's not going to work, that you might be able to work with a local organization to bring me or one of the other authors of SPR back to give a training where you can set up the continuing education before the training, so that whoever comes to the training could get the continuing education. That's another option.
Thank you. I would like to read some very positive feedback. Dr. Watson, thank you so much for such a wonderful, comprehensive and infoliate presentation. Great use of examples, use of slides. Learning a lot about now to help traumatized more forward in a way that works best for them. Your presentation reminds me of the old saying, give a man a fish, he eats for a day. Teach him how to fish, and he can eat for a lifetime. So thank you for sharing your expertise with us so we can assist others in a more constructive, supportive and empowering way. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That means very, very much to me. And I want to thank you all because you're the ones who are out there helping. And it's one of my greatest honors to be able to give a training to people who are out there helping. You all are a very unique and beautiful set of human beings who want to help. So I really wish you the best in the work that you're doing. And if there's any way I can support you, I'm happy to.
Thank you very much, Dr. Patricia Watson, for your great contribution on this event. I also would like to thank all our participants, our webinar, our technical support, and our translator. We are looking forward to meeting you soon at the next event. The topic of our next webinar, helping the elderly, priority assistance to the military, how to talk to people who have experienced physical or sexual violence. We are waiting for you. Take care and healthy. Thank you.